In ancient Greek mythology, Thalassa was the primordial goddess of the ocean. Not a ruler like Poseidon, but rather the ocean itself. Vast, unknowable, indifferent. Gentle one moment, devastating the next. A force of nature, one that could cradle life or swallow it whole. So, it is fitting that Thalassa is also the name of a ship, built for discovery and legacy. But what was meant to be a historical Expedition 33 now lies shattered on the seafloor, a monument to everything its crew never finished. And yet, taking a step back and looking at the crew, there was more beneath the surface. Tragedy, secrets, resentments that festered while the crew smiled through their final days, leaving us to wonder what or who caused the ship to sink and why. And also, what is going on with Cam, one of Thalassa's divers and the main protagonist, because something is wrong with him, making this watery crime scene all the more eerie. So, if you like unsettling horrors of what lives under the sea, throw a pineapple at the like button, or drop an anchor on the dislike button. Engagement is engagement, and welcome to the underwater mystery and story of
Thalassa, Edge of the Abyss.
The year is 1905, and the Thalassa is anchored in the Caribbean Sea. 1905 is also the same year that Einstein published his theory of relativity, and also almost around 200 years after the events of Pirates of the Caribbean, as that story takes place approximately in the mid-1700s. Assassin's Creed Black Flag story explained when. Currently, there are two divers down below, and Cam's attention is pulled away by Alex, who talks about being excited to go down and join in the dive. The Thalassa is on an expedition to dredge up a nearly 300-year-old Spanish galleon called the St. Catherine. Now, for some reason, Cam doesn't talk, so it's just Alex talking to him and her pausing, then continuing as if he said something. However, Bailey, the ship's dive support, comes in to get Alex, and she comments on how he is like a father to her, as she didn't grow up with a father. You can tell that she's close with the crew, and with you, as Cam is like a brother to her. But already, we see that Alex has been hiding something, as she tries to tell us that she hasn't been completely honest with us, but Bailey steals her away before she can say anything. As her partner, Cam is supposed to go with her, but she tells him to go see Kamar about a cradle first. So as she goes out to dive ahead, we head downstairs to admire the museum, the main hall, filled with relics collected by the Thalassa's proprietress, Isabel. Speaking with Kamar, he says that he needs time to find the cradle. So we go downstairs to get a dive order and admire the picture of Cam and Alex. Exploring further, we see a portrait of Alex's recently deceased mother Karis, her necklace, and Alex's elephant doll from when she was a baby, which will all become relevant later on. After some detective work in a game that I thought was just going to be a walking sim, I hate puzzles, Alex calls us up as she's about to go down. Stepping out into the grasp of the sunlight, as the aroma of salty water and stench of burning charcoal flows into me chest, we get to see some of what the crew has already dredged up from the St. Catherine. A sign, a cannon, and the ship's wheel. Gearing up with Bailey, the crane begins to move starboard. Isabel, the owner of the Thalassa and bankroller for the entire expedition, yells at her daughter, Maria, to snap photos of the St. Catherine figurehead as the crane brings it up out of the water. Next to Isabel is Captain Hans Capon. He's ambivalent about having a child bear the responsibility of taking pictures. I don't see what the big deal with taking pictures. I mean, I guess maybe he wanted them to come out looking good, but then maybe he should have just hired a professional photographer. I'm getting off track. When the figurehead comes up, the crane malfunctions, and with the brakes not working, the heavy figurehead drops right back into the ocean, rapidly torpedoing down below. Bailey rushes to the diver's intercom box to try and warn them, but it's too late. Matthias rips out a blood-curdling scream. So Bailey asks him if he's alright. No, dude, no, he's not alright. He's yelling in pain. He's not okay. But Bailey's voice then cracks and he panics to see if anyone, can help him. Dashing over to us, he says that we need to get down there, and Cam nods. Heading down below ourselves, Bailey tries to call for Alex, but she's unresponsive, leaving us to have to go and find our sister diver. Following the flares, Alex's voice statics through the radio. She's been pinned beneath the debris that fell on her when St. Catherine's figurehead came crashing down. Not too many steps away, we find her and immediately try to assist, but she's lost feeling in her leg. The mast smashed her leg and as a result, cut through her suit, which unfortunately means that if Cam doesn't hurry, her suit is going to fill up with water. Trying to slice through the ropes as fast as he can, we can hear Alex frantically begging him to hurry, but he fails. As he watched the life fade from her eyes, Cam was shocked and unmoving. Even as Bailey screamed asking what happened to Alex, Llewellyn had to come and pull him away from her.
Cam, what's going on down there? Do you have her? Have you got Alex? Is she hurt? Cam, talk to me. Damn it. Llewellyn, are you there yet? Do you have eyes on them? Cam, you have to let go. Alex, she didn't make it. Say that again?
Cam was so devastated that if nobody had come, he probably would have just stayed there with Alex. Back on board, even after his suit was removed, he couldn't do anything except sit on the deck and stare. Bailey tried to comfort him. The captain would also state that he's seen this kind of shock before, and ultimately the Thalassa returns to shore, with Bailey requesting leave in order to take care of Cam. For several months, he descends into depression, refusing to work or even go out to enjoy time with friends. All he did was sleep and imbibe all day. Bailey would eventually stop pitying him and get fed up with him, telling him that he needs to snap out of it. But then, one day, tragedy would strike again, as Bailey would receive a call, learning that the Thalassa had sunk, and with her, the entire crew. The two would set out for Thalassa's last known location, hoping to uncover why a ship they believed to be unsinkable had vanished beneath the waves. On Cam's desk, we find a document detailing the Thalassa's sinking, but right beside it, another sheet, hinting at something older and darker. Rumors that the Spanish galleon they were scavenging, the St. Catherine, was a cursed ship. So, was it Catherine's curse that killed Alex? Did the curse follow the Thalassa and then kill the entire crew? Either way, it didn't matter. Bailey and Cam knew that the crew had families, and they deserved closure. Descending back into the world that broke us, we move through the colorful swirls of the sea, and proceeding ahead, we look down to see the darkness of the trench below. It is honestly terrifying when you think about what's really down there, how deep it goes. In a game, sure, it doesn't feel that intense, but imagine actually being there. I can remember snorkeling in the open ocean with my wife, looking straight down and seeing this infinite, dark blue void domain expansion. It stretched in every direction, silent and still. Bro, I'm telling you, my body was freaking out, telling me that I was in danger, but God, it was a sight to behold for sure. If there was no water to hold you up, it'd be like falling into the sky, just in reverse, kind of. Eternal black below you. No ground, no bottom. So much of the ocean is still unexplored, and I feel like that's kind of scary. That's something else that makes the entire situation of being in the ocean deeply unsettling. Arriving at the Thalassa, she sits on the edge of the abyss. But that's when Cam notices someone walking on the deck, holding a light and looking over the side of the ship. But Bailey says that is impossible, but before we can get a good look, the diver disappears. Cam heads over to the side of the ship in order to open the door. However, in doing this, he nearly falls off the edge, dropping his tools. Heading inside of the watery cemetery, Cam begins looking for any clues he can to find out what happened. On the wall, we see a news article on the Thalassa that tells us about Isabel, who owns and funds it. She is the heiress to her family's shipping and logging fortune. And then, Bailey tells us that we should start by looking in the planning room. So, moving forward, we find a telegraph message in Morse code, which, when I translated, says SOS received, 2 days from your position, strong. I think it means to say stay strong, but I probably dropped the ball somewhere when I translated it. Naturally, a lot of sections are blocked off, like these pipes here at the top of the stairs that Cam can't just duck and crawl under like he did in order to get to the main hall. So we make our way through Isabel's office, the kitchen, and into the galley, where Bailey and Cam reminisce on better times. We learn that Isabel had invited a reporter named Jesse aboard the Thalassa, something that catches Bailey's attention, because Isabel was known for valuing her privacy, so bringing an investigative journalist along seemed rather out of character. Jessie, of course, did what reporters do best. She started digging into the crew, the mission, Isabel, anything that might make headlines. And so it wasn't long before she suspected the higher-ups were hiding something. But that mystery would quickly take a back seat, because not long after, the Thalassa was caught in a storm that nobody saw coming. But Bailey scoffs at this idea.
A storm front wouldn't sink a Thalassa. Hans was too experienced and it was a new ship. But if Isabel was picking up tombs, it must have been bad.
A storm, he says, couldn't have brought down the brand new ship with a well-seasoned captain at the helm, unless, of course, it was a storm of titanic proportions. In which case, man versus nature, man loses more often than not. Finding a wrench and circumventing our way over to the planning room, it is here that we find the ship's voyage plans and learn that Thalassa was out at sea for 11 days, heading back to port when they sank. Later, Cam would find an inspection letter where Eric had been tasked by the captain to investigate the crane incident that killed Alex. Now, with operator negligence and misconduct ruled out, Eric would then be left to look into the engineer's design, installation and maintenance, as well as purchased equipment and quality. It's likely that one of these things caused Alex's death. In Thomas's locker, we find a note. He heard something off in the engines and requested to stop the ship so that he and Kamar could investigate. It caused a massive delay. Now, with our next lead, we make our way to the engine room, but the only path forward is outside, around the deck. And as Cam opens the door to step out, something strange happens. He begins to hallucinate. The wreck is gone, the ship is whole again. Sunlight pours onto the polished wood, and the ocean is calm. And standing right there, looking out of the ocean, is Alex, alive and well. Cam is stunned, first by the peace of it all, then by the impossible sight of somebody who should be dead. He glances around, half hoping, half dreading that it's real. Finally, he works up the courage to talk to her. She tells him that she's happy and just wants to hold on to this moment. However, just like water, it's going to slip through her fingers or evaporate. But the moment shatters regardless. Bailey's voice cuts through. Still dazed, Cam asks if he remembers when he and Alex joined the Thalassa. Bailey does, but he's concerned. He warns Cam to speak up if he's showing any symptoms of narcosis. So, narcosis, specifically nitrogen narcosis, is a condition that affects divers at extreme depths. It happens when you're breathing compressed air underwater. That air is mostly nitrogen, and under pressure, your body will start to absorb more of it than it normally would on the surface. The deeper you go, the more nitrogen gets pushed into your bloodstream and tissues. At a certain point, usually beyond 30 meters, it'll begin to affect your brain. The effects are subtle at first. Slowed thinking, delayed reactions, but it can spiral quickly into confusion, poor judgment, and even hallucinations, especially in someone like Cam who's still dealing with severe trauma and depressive symptoms. Divers call it the rapture of the deep because it feels dreamlike, euphoric, like nothing can hurt you, and that is exactly why it is so dangerous. You start seeing things that aren't there, forgetting what's real, and in the wrong moment, that kind of disorientation can be fatal. And Cam? He's using a turn-of-the-century diving suit. A big, brass-helmeted rig connected to the surface by an air hose and a hardline voice system. That's how Bailey is still able to talk to him, but it also means he's breathing straight compressed air with no filters, no helium mix, no modern regulations, just a slow descent into pressure and silence. If narcosis sets in, the dude has nothing to stop it. Plus, he's been down there for a hot minute already. So, when he starts hearing voices or sees Alex on the deck with sunlight in her hair, we've got to ask, is this grief catching up to him? Survivor's guilt? A curse? Or is Rapture finally getting to his head? Going down below, we come across the infirmary and something unusual inside. A garter. An old-fashioned piece of woman's clothing worn around the thigh. Definitely not the kind of thing you'd expect to find in the sickbay. And it's not just the garter. Through the notes and recordings we've uncovered so far, we start seeing a bigger picture forming, one filled with tension. There was infighting among the crew. Eric was having issues with Kamar. Maria, Isabel's daughter, clearly didn't trust Jesse, the reporter. And this all came after the death of Alex, with some people taking leave, a loss in manpower, a storm raging outside, and something definitely wrong with the engines. Put it all together, and it feels less like a simple accident and more like a slow-motion breakdown, a pressure cooker, an unchained chain of events starting to whip about. And maybe, just maybe, we're getting closer to what really caused the Thalassa to sink. But to make matters worse, comms with Bailey is interrupted, which I am surprised it lasted this long, because if there's supposed to be a line that connects to the intercom above to Cam's diving suit down below, and we've spaghettied all around the ship, how are we still talking to him? Finding the crew's quarters, we check out Kamar's room. Under his rack, we find a bottle of whiskey, a fellow man of culture that. Plus, on his desk was a letter he wrote to Isabel, talking about somebody who was grinding his gears. However, on his blackboard, we find he was going through checks on specific parts, presumably on the parts we're going to find once we get to where we need to go, in the engine room. In Kadri, the ship's cook's room, there's an interview with Jesse, and he reveals that the captain hasn't been himself lately since Alex's death. He's become distant and downtrodden, no food or sleep, and he's been taking some pills. Who was Alex to Hans? In fact, back in the galley, we did find a bottle of heroin floating around. I gotta say, medicine was crazy back then, because back in 1905, heroin wasn't illegal. It was fucking medicine, bro. It's insane. Sold over the counter as cough suppressant, painkillers, even as a treatment for anxiety. You could buy it in syrups, powders, or just like this, in pills. Doctors didn't know how addictive it was, or maybe they did, they just didn't care. But that's just wild. This was also the same era when Coca-Cola still had real cocaine in it. Good old Snow, the Yayo, the Nose Candy, the White Lady. Just kidding. I love my wife. I would never touch the stuff. Sidetracked, but when Coke was first introduced in the 1880s, it was marketed as a tonic for exhaustion and nerves, made with extracts from cocoa leaves and cola nuts. Yeah, that Coca-Cola was definitely going to be something that would overcome exhaustion, even if it only lasted for 30 to 40 minutes. But it wasn't until the turn of the century, around 1904, due to an increasing amount of public concern, that they started to phase the cocaine out. So in 1905, yeah, there definitely could still be flakes in Coca-Cola. Where was I going with this? Oh, yeah, if somebody on the Thalassa was taking heroin, it wouldn't have raised eyebrows, especially since the bottle looked like it was prescribed. And if it belonged to Hans, it tells us something about the pain that he was in, or maybe what he was trying to forget. Maybe he wasn't healing a wound, maybe he was trying to numb something deeper. And Jessie was definitely great at her job, because she was catching whiffs left and right. She was picking up things quickly, sensing that something wasn't right on board. Eventually, we find another one of her accounts, hinting at the rising tides, but at that point, she'd only scratched the surface. Her notes are full of suspicion, but nothing concrete, not yet. Digging even deeper, we discover what went down in the engine room. Thomas and Kamar spent days overhauling the engines, but still couldn't find the issue. Upstairs, we find a torn, bloodied jacket, clear evidence that something violent happened. But before Cam can follow the trail, he's distracted and lured away. Alex's room. He freezes. A memory stirs. Ethereal, ghostly, half-formed. He steps inside, and it hits him all at once. A moment suspended in time. Moving on, among Alex's belongings, Cam finds a torn check. It's mostly illegible. No signature, no name, but the amount is clear. $100, which in 1905 would be worth about $3,500 to $3,800 today. So it was a lot of money, and it wasn't the first check either. Whatever was going on here, someone was getting paid, quietly, repeatedly. Turning around, Cam would also find a crew manifest for the Thalassa, but the name on the manifest was also unreadable. After passing by her toppled dresser with a hole somebody punched into it, we start our detective work again. Huh.
Cam? Can you hear me?
Weird. Cam just hears Alex's voice loud and clear, but maybe he's just hearing things. Anyway, let's get to this detective work. So, we learned that Alex was tracking somebody on the ship. But who? Why? And what does the check have to do with anything? In fact, Alex did join the ship years before Cam had come, so what was she hiding? Is this the thing that she was trying to tell us right before she died? Advancing through the waters, we hear her again, calling for help. And then, that's when we see her, pinned to the ground, mast on her leg, struggling like a poor trapped animal trying to get free. Cam is haunted, reliving this moment again, slicing through the ropes in the hopes that he can change the outcome this time, but we all know how this ends, and no amount of magical thinking is going to fix or rewrite reality. Once again, as the life in her eyes is replaced by water, she says she doesn't want to die. Broken. When Cam blinks, Alex is gone, and in her place is a rock. The ghost of Alex has started to bleed into Cam's fractured mind. He hears her voice now, vehemently accusing somebody of foul play. Someone caused her death, and she wants to know who and why. However, this is most likely trauma surfacing, a shattered piece of him that never fully healed, finally pushing its way into the open in the form of her voice speaking to him. But then, Cam remembers something. He forgot to search the rest of the infirmary. He'd gotten distracted, drawn away before checking the adjoining room. So he heads back, and there he finds a doctor's report on Captain Hans. Apparently, Hans suffered a severe injury to his right hand. Either he hit something, or something hit him hard enough to do real damage. Connecting the dots between the medical report and what we found in Alex's room, the answer is clear. Hans punched her closet hard enough to break his hand, but why? Onwards and upwards, into the higher-ups' quarters, the mystery deepens. In one room, we find a fault log where Thomas mentions he had proof that something was wrong with the engine. Nearby, another journal, this one written by somebody named Demi. Demi was Thomas's mentor, the man who trained him on everything that he knows about the Thalassa. According to the journal, Thomas had inexplicably asked him to step down. However, Demi thought that he was the only one who truly understood everything about the Thalassa, like the ship was a part of him, despite knowing that Thomas was fully capable. And maybe Thomas had a good reason for encouraging him to retire. The deeper we dig, the more secrets come to light. In another recorded conversation between Jesse and Maria, Maria confides that she believes her mother, Isabel, is hiding something. At this, Maria recalls one incident. Isabel left papers in her room. When Maria tried to look at them, her mom snapped at her. Jesse, of course, was curious, wondering if those papers had anything to do with Alex's accident. But just as the conversation seems ready to go somewhere, Maria shuts down. Her tone goes cold and she pushes back, not wanting to talk further. Inspecting a letter, we see that even though Jesse was brought onto the ship to cover the adventures and the expedition, her chief editor actually wanted her to see if she could find any scandals because that is what's going to sell. The thing is, everyone on the ship is hiding something. And whatever happened to the Thalassa, it didn't start with the storm. Do you remember that bloody jacket we found earlier? The one that was torn? Well, that also happens to match Thomas's jacket that we find here on his bed. Something happened, something brutal, and Thomas was badly hurt. The voice in our head would then tell us to move along and try to find out about the parts that Isabel purchased, suspecting that maybe she tried to cheap out on parts, causing the crane to break. In another interview, Jesse questions Captain Hans about Eric, the man he tasked with investigating the crew after Alex's death. But Jesse then drops a bomb. Eric hasn't been doing his job. He's been in Isabel's pocket the entire time. And so Hans is furious, storming off mid-interview. With Eric now in the spotlight, it's time that we check out his office. And it turns out, Eric had a very high opinion of himself. I mean, the walls are lined with self-adoration. We also learn that Isabel had personally chosen him to lead the expedition. Stepping back outside the ship, we're still chasing engine clues, when suddenly, a lifeboat comes crashing down on us. Cam blacks out. He finds himself drifting deep in the void of his own mind, but he's not here alone. He's got Alex. Not the Alex he loved, but a twisted echo, cold, sharp. She mocks him, belittles him, questions his strength. Without her, without Bailey, Cam would be lost. And she wants him to know this. But through the darkness, a voice cuts in. Bailey. Somehow he's gotten comms back online, so Cam snaps back to reality. The lifeboat didn't kill him, but it did pin him. Using a broken railing, he pushes some of the rocks off, sending the lifeboat off the ledge, freeing him. Luckily, his legs are completely fine. A pile of rubble kept it from being crushed completely. Alex's voice whispers in Cam's ear. "Don't mention me," she says. "Bailey wouldn't understand, he'd just worry." And maybe she's right. Bailey is already checking in, asking if Cam's okay. But Cam just keeps going. That is when he learns that the captain brought in another engineer to work on the engine, behind Thomas's back. And now Thomas, the head engineer, has no idea what's changed, no way to trace the problem. Consequently, whatever broke the Thalassa just got harder to find. Taking time to piece together some more clues, we learn that Eric and Isabel were doing more than just conspiring together. They were having a full-on fling in the infirmary room, of all places, hence the garter we found earlier. Really, a weird place to be doing the diddly, but okay. At this revelation, Alex remarks that this would mean Eric would have been compromised in his investigation into Isabel and the purchases she made, and yet they wouldn't be the only two having something going on. In a memory, in the mess hall one day, Eric would have words with Kamar about his work, how he never documented anything, so nobody would know if something was done or not, or what was done. Kamar would try to brush him off as he was trying to give Maria one-on-one guitar lessons. Eric would further say that this was inappropriate for a grown man to be spending so much intimate time with a 16-year-old. Things would escalate as Kamar would defiantly point out something about him that would strike a nerve in Eric. That he only knew how to show authority by barking at people. To this, he would aggressively rip the guitar out of Kamar's hands, instigating an altercation. We would then hear about Jesse pressing Isabel about the expedition's finances. She points out that a mission like this must cost a fortune, and yet Isabel's company's stocks are tanking. Caught off guard, Isabel shuts the conversation down, and that was answer enough. Jesse got what she needed. Something didn't add up. If the company was bleeding money, then how was any of this getting funded? While piecing things together, we come across some moments where Hans confronts Eric, livid that instead of investigating Isabel over what happened to Alex, he struggles to say her name, Eric was sleeping with her.
I trusted you to look into You're supposed to be conducting an investigation and said you're sleeping with the suspects!
Eric snaps back, saying Hans is out of line and that it's none of his business.
You're out of line, Captain. Whatever I or Isabel choose to do is our own affair. And I take my role and my duties seriously.
Bailey notes that this was unusual for Hans, who is normally level-headed. Later we learn that Maria had taken Jesse's recordings. She didn't like Jesse and wanted to protect her mother from whatever fallout the tapes might have brought. The real question is, where did she hide them? Plunging further into our investigation, we find a heroin prescription written for Hans, meant to treat his melancholy. But what was haunting him? Things get even more unsettling when later, Alex discovers her mother Karis's locket tucked away in Hans's desk. Why would he have that? As the pieces fall into place, it becomes clear. Isabel was lying about her finances, and now Alex suspects that her financial collapse may have played a role in her death. She says that people like Isabel are used to a specific lifestyle and would probably do something desperate to keep that up. With growing suspicions, they decide to check out Isabel's apartment, but on the way through the garden, Cam sees the other diver again, but Bailey just tells him not to lose his head. Up on the bridge where Hans once commanded the ship, Cam finds something strange. A check. It matches the torn one that he found in Alex's room, but this one is made out to her mother and marked returned, deceased. Why was he sending large payments to her mother? Cam also finds that while Kmart and Thomas worked to fix the engines, the mechanical issues only got worse, eventually leaving the ship dead in water. And with the storm rolling in, they were sitting ducks. Alex lashes out, blaming Isabel, saying that this is what happens when you value money over lives. She firmly believes Isabel cut corners to save costs. But Bailey pushes back, saying that alone wouldn't have caused engine failure. Later, they learn that lifeboats were launched, so why weren't there any survivors? Maybe the storm overturned them? Maybe the crew saw how bad it was and chose to stay on board? Or maybe the faulty equipment caused the lifeboats to break apart on launch. Either way, when Cam steps back into the garden, he steps into another illusion. There stands Alex, under a tree. She smiles, saying that this was always the perfect spot to recharge. It is beautiful here, especially on a calm night when the water dances in the moonlight. She admits that she thought it was strange at first for Isabel to build a garden on a ship, but now she gets it. A little piece of home makes life at sea easier. Looking down at her mother's locket, she reflects on her name, Karis. It's a derivative of grace. She tries to say something more, something that feels important, but again she locks up. Distracted by a shooting star, she asks, "What do you wish for?" But before Cam can answer, she looks him dead in the eye and whispers, "I wish I wasn't dead." Blinking back to what's real, we move on to search Hans's room, and what we find shatters everything Alex thought she knew. There is a photo of Hans with her mother, and on his bed is her childhood elephant doll. Hans was Alex's father. He hadn't realized until he began packing up her belongings, and that realization is what broke him. It's what drove him to drugs and depression. But now we understand why he was so emotionally invested in this investigation. This wasn't just a tragedy, it was personal. His daughter died on his ship. The aspect of Alex in Cam's head says she doesn't know why the real Alex kept this from them. And then she asks him if he understands that she isn't the real Alex. Maybe this is what she's been trying to say since the very beginning. But then we find her journal. She wrote that Hans abandoned Karis before she was born. The money he sent was an attempt to atone, to pay for the guilt of walking away from a child he never met. Alex used the checks her mother was receiving to trace her father, then joined the Thalassa hoping for closure, hoping she might finally learn something about her Oma and Opa. Which is a bit strange, because I'm pretty sure those are Korean words for mom and dad, but none of them look Korean. Just one of those little mysteries I probably will never get an answer to. Back on the bridge, we find a message that Thomas and Kamar found an issue with the boiler, but also that they have a temporary solution. When Cam turns around, Bailey miraculously points out a green book way off in the dark in a box. How did he see that? Were cameras and streaming a thing back then for divers in 1905? Anyway, reading this journal, Cam's mind would show signs of further exacerbated mental degradation, as Bailey's voice echoes away until it isn't Bailey anymore. Just another voice, another aspect in Cam's head, saying how convenient it was that Bailey saved him. Regardless, the voices in his head started bickering about heading down to the boiler room to find out what happened. Alex would question why Bailey needed to go down there if everything was memorized in his head, but funnily enough, Bailey tells Alex that he only knows what they know, what Cam remembers, because they're all aware. They're just voices in his head. It wasn't long before they discovered the cause of the engine failure. Water had been getting into the system and causing the ship to stall. This reminds me of when I was 18. I had this aftermarket intake installed on my car, lowered it way too close to the ground, total rookie move, and because I live in the Pacific Northwest, where it rains constantly, water would get sucked straight into the engine. One time, I stalled out on a hill, and because it was a stick shift, I ended up rolling back and almost hitting the car behind me. But moving forward, Cam would be haunted by Alex's death once again. Another hallucination pulling him under. Again, he tries to cut the rope. Another Alex shows up on the bench saying she wishes she wasn't dead, and then she scorns him for leaving her to die. This guilt that Cam has, it's like the ocean is pressing down on him. To get into the boiler room, they need the master key locked inside of Isabel's apartment, and when they step in, they find out that it's barren. All the expensive furnishings, the luxury, gone, and the shipwreck wasn't the cause. After finding keys and some documents, we discover that Isabel sold everything of value in her apartment. She sacrificed to cover the crew's wages. She didn't choose herself. She didn't choose wealth. She chose her people. When Alex realizes this, she says that if it wasn't cheap parts that caused her death, then someone else is to blame. With the master key, they check Jesse's room. In her final logs, she admits that she suspected something sinister, but ultimately found nothing sensational. Her boss wanted something front-page worthy, but the juiciest scoop that Jesse could find was that Isabel was romantically involved with Eric. That is it. Eric would even try to propose, but Isabel turned him down. She didn't want to marry again. She wanted to remain independent and protect her family name and legacy. Eric was left broken. And that was that. I still wonder if there was more to their story. I just didn't find anything else. Pushing into the main hall, they spot the mysterious diver again, as if it was a ghost that didn't want to leave the ship. Bailey brushes it off, saying that Narcosis is probably messing with his head. And from there, things only spiral. As Cam descends deeper, he sees Alex, this time with an orange cat. He blinks and suddenly he's back in the moment he last saw her alive. She tells him to not let her die this time. But when we try to stop her, Bailey walks through, blocking our way out, saying that there's nothing we can do. After several moments, water crashes through. It begins to flood, and with no way out, Cam drowns. After waking up from that nightmare, we follow Thomas's blood trail, unlocking the gate and heading deeper below. More blood greets us as we find bloody handprints on the walls. With the boiler room blocked, we search for another way in. Except the other way in is also blocked off, but when we peer all the way to the back of the room, we find another door hacked down with an axe. Alex comments that this door was never meant to be locked, so why did somebody have to Johnny the door down? Did somebody try locking someone else in the boiler room? Uncovering the truth about Thomas's mentor, it turns out the old man had been making mistakes with the engine for a while, and Thomas had been secretly covering for him to protect his pride and reputation. Every time his mentor messed up, Thomas would quietly fix it, but not this time. This time he couldn't find the problem in time. The mistake went too far and now everybody's dead. If only Thomas had said something. If only he had insisted that his mentor go into retirement. That could have been the one thing that saved the crew, that saved the ship. Overhearing another conversation between Kamar and Thomas, we learn that Kamar claims he and Jesse are on good terms. At this, Thomas teases him that he's charmed another lass, poking him that Maria clearly had a crush on him too. Not a good look. Honestly, if it were me, the first hint of an underage girl getting too close, I'd shut that down immediately. And if she really wanted guitar lessons, public setting, parental supervision, that's it. Keep it strictly professional, no private sessions, no blurred lines, especially not when you already have a fiancé. But Kamar would try to defend himself, saying that Maria was just a kid, that it wasn't serious, it was harmless, that he already made it clear that he wasn't interested. But Thomas wasn't buying it. He knows what's going on. Kamar should have been blunt. He should have been explicitly straight up. That being said, Kamar wasn't necessarily a bad guy. He was constantly overwhelmed with work. He stayed late, and even when tired, he tried to help everybody that he could. He never caught up on paperwork because he was always doing the work. Later, we witness a memory. Maria walks into his room, drunk on whiskey, and she sits on his bed, trying to put the moves on him. Again, that should have been a hard get up, get out, don't stay alone with her, tell someone, make it public. He should have been harsh, because obviously trying to let her down easy wasn't working. Even Bailey admits it. Kamar shouldn't have let it get to that point. But I guess in the end, it didn't even matter. Pressing into the boiler room, we learn the truth. An official report confirms it. The part manufacturer was to blame. A nearly invisible stress fracture in the metal was the root cause. Cam and Alex don't want to accept that a random, honest accident could have killed her, could have killed everyone. But that's what it was. A chain of small problems that snowballed into catastrophe, ripples into waves, the butterfly effect. And it started with a flaw on the other side of the world. No one could have caught that. Nobody could have seen that coming. Then Thomas's aging mentor, trying to help but only making things worse. Thomas staying silent, Kamar and Thomas scrambling to patch things together, the storm closing in, internal tension, fractured relationships, emotional exhaustion, Alex's death, endless shifts, the pressure kept building until the boiler exploded. A fire tore through the ship. The hose closet was locked, so Eric hacked it open with an axe. Jesse heard the noise and rushed in to help Thomas out. That's why we find the blood trail and we find Thomas's bloody jacket. And then Eric and Kamar stayed behind to fight the blaze together, putting aside all the bad blood. and they fought until the flames consumed them. And with that breach, the ocean did the rest. The Thalassa went down. And that locked door, the one that should have never been locked, that was Maria. She was just trying to help her mom, stashing Jesse's recordings away to protect her. However, it does get me thinking, if that door hadn't been locked, perhaps they could have reached the hose in time. Maybe the fire wouldn't have spread. Maybe things would have gone differently. We could keep unraveling the chain of events, the what-ifs, the might-have-beens, but for Alex, none of that mattered. She needed a reason, someone to blame, anything but chaos, anything but the idea that it all was just a tragic, meaningless accident. She needed closure, and a random part defect wasn't going to be enough. It felt like a lie. Cam would direct his grief at everybody. Nobody cared enough. And if anybody had, if they'd done something, maybe she'd still be alive. But with nobody to truly blame, he blames everyone, and then he drowns in it. In the darkness, Alex's light appears, guiding Cam back to his feet. She tells him the truth he's been avoiding. Even if he doesn't like the answers, they are the answers. It wasn't some grand betrayal, it wasn't a single villain, it was just chaotic missteps and bad luck that spiraled into tragedy. She tells him that it's okay to be angry that she's gone, but that it's time to find a way out. Bailey's voice would crackle through the comms. There's a storm coming. They need to leave, and they need to leave now. Cam starts making his way back, but then something stops him. He sees Alex one last time, and he's faced with a choice. Stay or let go. In one ending, Alex begs him not to leave her again, and Cam stays, chained by guilt, choking over the edge of the abyss, and then he starts cutting the rope once more. But this time, it's not the past that he's cutting. It's his own suit. Water floods in, and just like Alex, Cam drowns, unable to leave. But in the other ending, if he chooses to let go, if he walks away from the guilt and grief that's been hollowing him out since the day she died, then Alex, or what's left of her, begs him not to let her die alone. And it almost convinces Cam to stay. He's torn, he's heartbroken. Even after he steps over and tries to leave, he turns around, unable to brunt living through the pain of leaving her to die a cold and lonely death once again. But Cam does it anyway. He saves himself and surfaces, ready to live again. But while many are able to rise above their traumas, some just choose to stay in their tragedies. And you can learn all about that in this epic tale of Clair Obscure, Expedition 33, where everyone deals with grief differently.